Welcome to Episode 8 of Channel Legendarium. Today we'll be taking a look at Christmas through the ages. First we'll be studying the Roman Saturnalia, a tradition which would later influence Christmas, and then we'll be looking at Christmas as it was celebrated during the Middle Ages, both the High Middle Ages of the year 1000 to 1300, and then the Late Middle Ages of 1300 to 1500. Now, if you saw the episode about how Zeus became king of the gods, you might remember an unpleasant fellow named Kronos, a god who tried to keep his power forever by eating his own children. Of course, one of his children, Zeus, was spirited away and later returned to depose his wicked father. And despite his habit of eating his own children, the Greeks and later the Romans continued to worship him in a festival called the Saturnalia, by the Romans because they called him Saturn. If you traveled back to Rome during the time of the Saturnalia, you would have seen crowds filling the streets screaming, "Lo, Saturnalia!" just as we shout Merry Christmas today. All taboos would have been lifted for that one day, so you would have seen Romans gambling in public, something you normally couldn't do, playing games of knucklebones and dice. Roman aristocrats, who were usually very conservative in their dress, would wear these bright, garish colors like red and yellow and purple. But the biggest change of all was in role reversals. During Saturnalia, slaves got to sit at the table while the masters got to serve them. The masters would have to dance and sing and wait on the slaves at the table while the slaves got to run riot, laugh, carry on, and make a huge mess while their owners had to clean up after them. Obviously, this was done for only the day of Saturnalia. It is worth noting that the early church fathers generally frowned upon Saturnalia because of all the revelry and drinking and carrying on. However, the early church fathers also disapproved of celebrating anybody's birthday, which they regarded as a pagan ceremony. So the early church fathers didn't originally even have a birthday for Jesus, at least not until the 300s, when they settled upon December 25th, which happened to fall very close to the Saturnalia. And the church fathers always tried to discourage or even suppress the Saturnalia, but they always failed just because people enjoyed it so much. And that might be one of the reasons why Christmas was created in order to supplant it. However, the church fathers wanted a more somber and pious holiday to contrast with the wild revelries of the Roman Saturnalia. Now, if you were a medieval Christian, you did get your Christmas, however, you had to work for it. For the entire month of the Advent, you would have to fast until Christmas Day. But when Christmas Day finally came, you got a feast. Now, whether you were a lord or a peasant, you would decorate your house with holly and ivy and candles. Of course, the lords got to eat better. The nobles would eat geese and swans and eels and venison, and the greatest delicacy of all, boar's head soup with mustard. And so that the poor would have a Christmas treat, they sent them the bits of the boar or the pig they didn't care for very much, like the lungs and the entrails, and the poor would use it to make humble pie. Now, humble pie probably didn't taste very good, so at least the Lord sent lots of beer to help it go down a little bit better. And more important still, they also sent the peasants a feast of bacon with mustard along with ham as a sort of thank you for all of the hard work on their manor over the year. In fact, Christmas Day was considered important enough by medieval people that many kings chose to be coronated on that day, including William the Conqueror in Christmas 1066, who used the occasion to present himself as the Prince of Peace. And if you know anything about Duke William's conquest of England, you know that claim is pretty darn laughable. But for all of the longevity of the holiday and its importance, Christmas was still secondary to Easter in the medieval Christian calendar. You might know that before we turn to worshipping the Easter bunny, Easter was the day when Christians celebrated Christ's resurrection after his crucifixion. By the late Middle Ages, beginning in the 1300s and lasting through the 1500s, poets, writers, and historians began looking to ancient Rome for inspiration and for ideas. And their ideas about ancient Rome spread out to the general public. One of these involved a major rewriting of Christmas. Instead of the month of fasting and prayer that led up to Christmas, they turned the season into a wild revelry, much like what the Romans would have known. One new addition to Christmas during this time was caroling. Carols during the High Middle Ages were an interesting mix of high and low topics and high and low language. For topics, of course, they would sing about things as lofty as prayer to Saint Mary, and also, sometimes in the same song or even the same lyric, sing about the pleasures of chicken soup with a side of cheese. These songs would also be sung in a mix of High Latin, which most of the peasants likely didn't understand, along with their native language of English, French, German, or what have you. During the late Middle Ages, carolers took their job a bit more seriously, likely because they got wassail. Wassailing probably had its origins in a pagan custom of singing to the trees to keep them fruitful. However, during the late Middle Ages, this tradition got revised a little bit, so you would go to the houses of the rich with a wassail bowl, and in exchange for those lovely songs about chicken soup and praying to Saint Mary, the rich would give you bowls of wassail, which is basically ale mixed with wine and spices and honey, and sometimes a little egg for thickness. I'm sure it made the Christmas very merry indeed. However, if the rich chose to play Scrooge and withheld the wassail, the poor had license to go in and ransack their homes. They would tear apart the furniture, they would rip up the flagstones, and go down into the basement to drink the wine dry and eat all of the cheeses and meat that they could get their hands on. Also hearkening back to Roman Saturnalia, they had role reversals. One example of this took place in France, where a boy bishop was elected, and during his sermon, the boy bishop called on his congregation to hang all of his teachers. What a charming lad. I hope the teachers celebrated Christmas by giving him extra homework. And thankfully, the congregation did not go through with the boy bishop's wishes. In the inns and taverns of medieval Europe, it became common for the regular patrons to elect lords of misrule, who would lead them in grand riots through the streets as they ran through, tipping over fruit carts, chasing after people, and unfortunately, some of the lords of misrule ruined everything for everybody after they caused a number of deaths, and that led some people to quite sensibly believe that Christmas had gotten out of hand. And that's where we're going to pick up on the next episode, which will focus on Christmas in the modern age. I'd like to thank you for joining me in episode 8 of Channel Legendarium. If you enjoyed what you heard, please press like. If you're interested in more, press subscribe. And if you have any thoughts on what your favorite Christmas would have been, please let me know in the comments. Thank you again for joining me, and have a Merry Christmas.